Mount Everest is not the tallest mountain on Earth. Tonight we visit the one that is. Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Science Facts channel. Tonight we are going somewhere that has drawn human eyes upward for as long as humans have existed. The mountains. Not simply the dramatic peaks that appear on postcards and expedition documentaries, but the real mountains. The ones that are still growing right now as you listen. The ones that exist beneath the ocean, taller than Everest, that almost no one has ever seen. The ones whose roots extend so deep into the earth that they reach conditions more similar to the mantle than to the surface. The ones that create their own weather, shelter species found nowhere else on Earth, preserve the oldest rocks on the planet, and hold in their glacier a record of every summer and winter for hundreds of thousands of years. Mountains cover roughly a quarter of the Earth's land surface. They are the source of more than half of the world's fresh water. They are home to a quarter of the world's land biodiversity. They are the boundaries of civilizations, the birthplaces of rivers, the archives of geological time, and the most visible evidence that the ground beneath us is not still but in constant, slow, powerful motion. In this video, we are going to cover mountains in every sense of the word. Every chain, every mystery, every creature, and every force that makes these landscapes among the most scientifically extraordinary environments our planet has ever produced. This is a complete and unhurried journey through the world's mountains, from the Himalayas to the mid-ocean ridges, from the Andes to the ancient worn-down roots of ranges that were once taller than anything on Earth today, told at a pace that lets the details settle and the wonder breathe. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your body soften and allow your breathing to slow and allow the day to gently fade away as we explore the mysteries of the world's mountains together. Let's begin. Mountains are not permanent features of the Earth. They are the temporary result of forces that build and forces that destroy, locked in a slow contest measured in millions of years. Every mountain range on Earth is either growing, stable, or being worn away, and most are doing all three simultaneously at different rates and in different locations. The Himalayas are still rising because the Indian tectonic plate is still driving northward into the Eurasian plate at a rate of about 40 to 50 millimeters per year, a speed comparable to the rate at which your fingernails grow. The collision has been ongoing for about 50 million years and is still far from finished. Meanwhile, erosion from rivers, glacier, freeze-thaw cycles, and chemical weathering is removing material from the surface of those same mountains at a rate that would reduce them to flat plains in tens of millions of years if the uplift stopped. The balance between these two forces, the tectonic engine pushing rock upward and the surface processes grinding it down, determines the height and character of any mountain range at any given moment. Old mountain ranges like the Appalachians in North America and the Scottish Highlands were once as tall as the Himalayas or taller, and billions of years of erosion without significant ongoing uplift have worn them to their current gentle profiles. The mountains we see today are a snapshot of a process that began long before humans existed, and will continue long after we are gone. Mauna in Hawaii is the tallest mountain on Earth when measured from its base to its summit, and Everest is not even close. Mount Everest rises 8,849 meters above sea level, and it holds the record for the highest point on Earth relative to sea level. But Mauna Kea, a dormant volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii, rises approximately 10,200 meters from its base on the ocean floor to its summit above the Pacific, making it roughly 1,300 meters taller than Everest in absolute height from base to peak. Most of Mauna Kea's height is underwater, which is why it does not appear on lists of the world's highest peaks, since those are measured from sea level. There is also a third way to measure mountain height, as distant from the center of the Earth, and by this measurement the winner is Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador. Because the Earth is slightly flattened at the poles and bulges at the equator, sea level at the equator is farther from the center of the Earth than sea level near the poles. Chimborazo sits very close to the equator, and its summit, though only 6,263 meters above sea level, is farther from the Earth's center than the summit of Everest by more than 2 kilometers. The tallest, the highest, and the furthest from the center of the Earth are three different mountains, and which one deserves the title of the world's greatest mountain depends entirely on how you choose to measure greatness. The Himalayas were built by the collision of two continents, and the evidence of that collision is written in the rocks of their summits in a way that is astonishing to consider. When India, which was once an island continent in the southern hemisphere, began moving northward about 71 million years ago and eventually collided with Asia around 50 million years ago. The seafloor sediments and marine rocks that had accumulated in the ocean between them were caught between the converging plates and pushed upward. This means that the summit rocks of many Himalayan peaks, including the limestone and marine sediments near the top of Mount Everest, contain fossils of sea creatures that lived in a shallow tropical sea. Marine fossils have been found at altitudes above 8,000 meters in the Himalayas, in rocks that formed on the ocean floor and were subsequently pushed to the highest elevations on the planet by the force of two continents pressing against each other. The collision also forced enormous sheets of rock over each other in a process called thrust faulting, stacking the crust and thickening it so that the mountains have deep roots extending far below the surface into the mantle. These roots mean the Himalayas are, in a sense, an iceberg, with more of their mass hidden below the surface than visible above it. The mountains that seem to reach so dramatically toward the sky are balanced by an equally dramatic depth of rock extending silently downward into the earth. The Andes are the longest continental mountain range on Earth, and they have shaped the entire climate, biodiversity, and human history of South America. The Andes extend for approximately 7,000 kilometers along the western edge of South America from Venezuela and Colombia in the north to the southern tip of Chile and Argentina, passing through some of the most biologically diverse regions on the planet. They were formed by the subduction of the Nazca and Antarctic oceanic plates beneath the South American continental plate, a process that has been ongoing for tens of millions of years and that continues today, generating some of the most powerful earthquakes and most active volcanoes on Earth. The Andes create a massive barrier to atmospheric circulation, blocking moisture from the Pacific and creating the rain shadow responsible for the Atacama Desert on their western flank while feeding the Amazon basin with rain and glacial melt on the eastern side. The extraordinary biodiversity of the Andes, which contain more endemic species than any other mountain range on Earth, is partly a product of their height and the steep gradient of environments they create. Within a few horizontal kilometers, one can pass from tropical lowland forest through cloud forest, high-altitude grasslands called paramo, and into permanent snow and ice, each zone harboring species found nowhere else. The Inca civilization built the most extensive empire in the pre-Columbian Americas by mastering the steep vertical geography of the Andes, developing agricultural terracing systems that turned seemingly impossible slopes into productive farmland, and a road network that connected communities across altitudes and climates that would seem impossible to integrate. Mountains create their own weather, and the meteorology of mountain ranges is one of the most complex and least predictable in the world. When air masses encounter mountain range, they are forced upward. As air rises, it cools, and cooler air can hold less water vapor. The moisture condenses into clouds and falls as rain or snow on the windward side of the range. By the time the air descends on the leeward side, it has lost much of its moisture and warms as it compresses, arriving as dry and often hot air. This process, called orographic precipitation, is responsible for some of the wettest places on Earth on the windward sides of mountain ranges and some of the driest on the leeward sides. Cherrapunji in India, on the southern slopes of the Meghalaya Hills near the Himalayas, receives over 11,000 millimeters of rain per year, making it one of the wettest places on Earth. The rain shadow on the far side of the same system contributes to the aridity of the Tibetan Plateau. Mountains also generate their own local wind systems. Katabatic winds flow down mountain slopes as cold, dense air sinks from high elevations, sometimes reaching hurricane force in extreme cases. Valley breezes and mountain breezes reverse direction between day and night, as the different heating rates of valley floors and mountain slopes create pressure differences that drive air circulation. A mountain range does not simply sit in a climate. It actively creates microclimates within and around itself in patterns so complex that they support entirely different ecosystems within kilometers of each other. Mountain glaciers are among the most important water stores on Earth, and they are retreating at rates that have no precedent in the period of human civilization. Mountain glacier form where snowfall accumulates faster than it melts, and the accumulated snow compresses under its own weight into ice that slowly flows downhill under gravity. They act as natural reservoirs, storing water as ice during wet and cold seasons and releasing it as meltwater during dry and warm seasons, providing a buffer that smooths the flow of rivers that hundreds of millions of people depend on for drinking water, irrigation, and hydroelectric power. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region alone, sometimes called the Third Pole because it contains the largest concentration of glacial ice outside the polar regions, provides water to river systems that support approximately 2 billion people downstream. Studies show that most mountain glaciers around the world are losing mass, retreating upslope, and in many cases disappearing entirely. The rate of retreat has accelerated dramatically in recent decades and is now occurring faster than any time in the last 2,000 years based on ice core and geological evidence. When glaciers disappear, the seasonal buffering they provide disappears with them. Rivers that once flowed steadily through dry seasons begin to experience more extreme cycles of flood during snowmelt and drought later in the year, disrupting agriculture and water supplies in regions where the downstream populations have built their lives around a predictable flow. The mountains are releasing their ice, and the world downstream is feeling the change. The world's highest mountain range is also the world's youngest in geological terms, and it sits above one of the most seismically active regions on the planet. The ongoing collision between the Indian and Eurasian plates that builds the Himalayas also stores enormous quantities of elastic energy in the crust, energy that is released periodically in earthquakes. Nepal, northern India, Pakistan, and Bhutan all sit within or immediately adjacent to the collision zone and experience some of the highest seismic hazard of any populated region on Earth. The 2015 Gorkha earthquake in Nepal, which killed nearly 9,000 people and injured 22,000, was produced by the same tectonic process that is building the mountains. The earthquake caused visible surface ruptures, triggered thousands of landslides, and displaced entire villages. Historical records and geological evidence suggest that comparable or larger earthquakes have struck the Himalayan region approximately every few hundred years throughout its history, and that the accumulated strain in certain segments of the fault has not been released in centuries, representing a potential source of future large earthquakes. The irony is profound. The same force that has created some of the most magnificent landscapes on Earth attracted climbers, scientists, and spiritual pilgrims from every culture, and provided water to billions of people, is also the force that periodically reminds those same people how little control they have over the ground beneath their feet. The mid-ocean ridges are the longest mountain chain on Earth, stretching over 65,000 kilometers across the ocean floor, and almost no human has ever seen them. The mid-ocean ridge system encircles the entire planet in a continuous chain, running down the center of the Atlantic Ocean, across the Indian Ocean, and through the Pacific, with branches extending into smaller ocean basins. The ridges form where tectonic plates pull apart and magma wells up from below to fill the gap, creating new oceanic crust and building mountain ranges in the process. Peaks along the mid-ocean ridges can rise thousands of meters from the ocean floor, and in some locations, particularly in Iceland where the mid-Atlantic ridge emerges above sea level, the volcanic activity at the ridge can be seen and studied directly. Iceland is one of the few places on Earth where mid-ocean ridge is accessible on land, and the spreading of the plates is visible in the widening rift valleys that run through the country and in the frequent volcanic eruptions along the rift zone. Along the submerged portions of the ridge system, hydrothermal vents support the chemosynthetic ecosystems described in the Ocean Facts video, communities of organisms that have never seen sunlight. The mid-ocean ridges are simultaneously the most active tectonic environment on Earth, the birthplace of most of the oceanic crust, and the site of some of the most unusual biological communities known. They are mountains in every geological sense, and they are almost entirely invisible to the surface world above them. The Appalachians and the Scottish Highlands are the eroded remnants of a mountain range that was once comparable in height to the Himalayas, and they represent one of the most ancient mountain building events in Earth's history. Approximately 320 million years ago, the ancient continents of Laurentia, Baltica, and Gondwana were colliding to form the supercontinent Pangaea, and a collision zone between them produced a mountain range called the Central Pangaean Mountains that may have reached heights of 8,000 meters or more. The Appalachians of eastern North America, the Caledonides of Scotland and Scandinavia, the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, and scattered ranges in West Africa are all fragments of this same ancient mountain system, separated when Pangaea broke apart and the Atlantic Ocean formed between them. The rocks in the Appalachians and the Scottish Highlands match each other in age, composition, and structure in ways that make no sense unless you restore the Atlantic Ocean and bring the continents back together. When geologists first proposed this connection in the early 20th century, before plate tectonics was accepted, it was considered extraordinary and controversial. Today it is one of the most elegantly demonstrated consequences of continental drift. The worn-down hills of Appalachia and the gentle moors of the Scottish Highlands are the ancient cores of peaks that were once as dramatic as anything in the Himalayas, reduced by hundreds of millions of years of patient erosion to shadows of their former selves. Mountains are among the most important drivers of biological diversity on Earth, and the mechanism by which they generate new species is one of the most productive in evolution. Mountains create steep gradients of temperature, humidity, and vegetation type across very short horizontal distances, effectively compressing many different environments into a small area. As populations of animals and plants move up and down these gradients in response to climate shifts over geological time, they become separated from other populations of the same species by mountain barriers, lowland environments they cannot cross, or changes in habitat that break the connections between populations on different slopes or in different valleys. This isolation allows populations to diverge genetically over time until they become distinct species, a process called allopatric speciation. The result is that mountain ranges tend to contain far more species per unit area than lowland regions, with particularly high rates of endemic species found only in a single mountain range or even a single valley. The tropical Andes contain approximately a sixth of all plant species on Earth despite covering less than 1% of its land surface, a concentration of plant diversity with no parallel anywhere else in the world. Cloud forests on tropical mountain slopes are among the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet, with ferns, mosses, orchids, bromeliads, and an extraordinary variety of birds and insects filling every available niche in the cool, mist-soaked forest. The mountain is not just a habitat. It is a diversity engine, constantly separating populations, driving speciation, and accumulating a product of millions of years of isolated evolution in its valleys and slopes. The highest permanently inhabited settlements on Earth are in mountain regions, and the people who live there have evolved physiological adaptations to high altitude that took thousands of years to develop. At high altitudes, the air contains the same proportion of oxygen as at sea level, about 21%. But the lower atmospheric pressure means each breath delivers fewer oxygen molecules to the lungs. The result is hypoxia, a shortage of oxygen in the tissues, which causes altitude sickness in unacclimatized individuals and can be fatal at extreme elevations. People who have lived at high altitude for thousands of generations have evolved heritable physiological differences that allow them to function normally in conditions that would incapacitate lowlanders. The Tibetan people of the Himalayan plateau, who have lived above 4,000 meters for approximately 10,000 years, carry variants of a gene called EPS1 that regulates how their bodies respond to low oxygen. The variant they carry appears to have been acquired by interbreeding with an archaic human population called the Denisovans, and it allows their hemoglobin levels to remain relatively low while still delivering adequate oxygen, avoiding the thickening of the blood that causes the clotting problem seen in lowlanders who attempt to acclimatize rapidly. The Andean people of South America have a different set of genetic adaptations involving higher hemoglobin concentrations and increased lung capacity. The same physiological problem, solved differently by two populations separated by 10,000 kilometers, each refined over thousands of years of living where most humans cannot breathe comfortably. Mountain rivers are among the most powerful erosive forces on Earth, and the landscapes they carve over millions of years are among the most dramatic on the planet. When a mountain range rises, the rivers that drain it begin cutting downward into the rising rock, and because the rock is rising faster than the river can cut in the early stages of uplift, the rivers are forced to cut ever deeper gorges. The Yarlung Zangpo Gorge in Tibet, where the Brahmaputra River cuts through the eastern end of the Himalayas, is the world's deepest river canyon, reaching depths of approximately 5,500 meters below the surrounding mountain peaks. The river is being uplifted by the tectonic collision at the same time as it is cutting downward, and the combination has produced a gorge of extraordinary depth and steepness that is still largely inaccessible and poorly explored. Rivers flowing from mountain ranges carry enormous quantities of sediment eroded from the peaks and deposited in the lowlands and eventually in the ocean, building deltas and continental shelves. The Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, fed by rivers draining the Himalayas, is one of the largest river deltas in the world and has been built from material removed from the Himalayan mountains over millions of years of erosion. The mountains are being disassembled grain by grain and deposited in the sea, and the delta that hundreds of millions of people call home is made of mountains that no longer exist. Snow and ice on mountains behave in ways that are counterintuitive and that have been reshaping mountain landscapes for millions of years. Glaciers are not simply frozen rivers sliding passively downhill. They are dynamic systems that erode the bedrock beneath them with extraordinary efficiency, carrying embedded rock fragments that act like sandpaper against the valley floor, grinding and polishing the rock and leaving characteristic U-shaped valleys, hanging valleys, and cirques. The characteristic shapes of glacially carved mountain landscapes, the sharp arêtes, the pyramidal horns like the Matterhorn in Switzerland, and the broad U-shaped troughs, are all products of glacial erosion operating over hundreds of thousands to millions of years. Glaciers also carry enormous quantities of rock and debris, depositing it as moraines when they retreat, and the moraines left by retreating glaciers serve as historical markers that allow researchers to reconstruct the extent and timing of past glacial advances. The weight of large ice sheets on mountain landscapes causes the crust to sink under the load, and when the ice melts, the crust rebounds upward in a process called isostatic rebound that is still measurable in regions once covered by ice. Scandinavia is still rising by several millimeters per year, thousands of years after the ice sheets that depressed it melted. The mountains of Norway and Sweden are still recovering from the weight of ice that left more than 10,000 years ago, a reminder that the Earth's crust responds to loads and their removal on timescales that outlast the civilizations that observe it. The Rockies of North America preserve some of the most extraordinary geological puzzles on the continent, and one of them involves a slab of rock that moved over 80 kilometers from where it formed. In Glacier National Park in Montana, a vast sheet of ancient Precambrian rock, over 1.5 billion years old, sits on top of much younger Cretaceous rock that is only about 150 million years old. Younger rock should sit on top of older rock in an undisturbed geological sequence, so older rock lying on top of younger rock is one of the most visually obvious signs of a major geological disturbance. The explanation is one of the largest thrust faults ever documented. During the Rocky Mountain building event, a sheet of ancient rock approximately 80 kilometers wide and several kilometers thick was pushed eastward along a fault surface over the younger rock beneath it, sliding an enormous distance on a layer of weak shale that acted almost like a lubricant. This structure, called the Lewis Overthrust, is visible in the cliff faces of Glacier National Park, where the line between the ancient dark rock above and the younger lighter rock below is clear enough to be seen from the highway. It is one of the most dramatic visible records of the forces involved in mountain building, a kilometer-high cross-section through an event that happened 60 to 70 million years ago, still readable in the color and texture of the rock. Mountains are the birthplace of rivers that sustain the majority of the world's population, and the rivers they produce have shaped human civilization as much as any other geographical feature. The major rivers of Asia, including the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Indus, Yangtze, Yellow, Mekong, and Irrawaddy, all originate in the mountains of the Hindu Kush, Karakoram, and Himalayas. Together they provide water to approximately 3 billion people across South and Southeast Asia. The major rivers of South America, including the Amazon and its tributaries, originate in the Andes. The Nile receives a significant portion of its annual flow from the Ethiopian highlands. The Rhine, Rhone, Po, and Danube all originate in the Alps. The Colorado, Missouri, and Columbia all begin in the Rocky Mountains. The pattern is consistent and global. Mountain ranges intercept atmospheric moisture, convert it to snow and ice, store it, and release it gradually through rivers that flow into the lowlands where agriculture, cities, and industry have developed. The relationship between mountain watershed and human settlement is so fundamental that it has operated as a constant background condition of human civilization without being widely recognized as such. The mountains provide what the cities and farms below them cannot provide for themselves, and the degree to which billions of people depend on mountain hydrology for their daily water supply is one of the most important and least discussed facts in global resource management. Some mountains are hollow, and the cave systems inside them are among the most extraordinary environments on Earth. Mountain karst, formed when slightly acidic water dissolves limestone over thousands to millions of years, can produce cave systems of staggering extent and complexity inside mountain ranges. The Vercors Plateau in the French Alps contains cave systems extending for hundreds of kilometers. The mountains of Borneo and Papua New Guinea contain some of the largest individual cave chambers in the world. Day Cave in the Gunung Mulu National Park of Malaysia and Borneo has a passage large enough to fly a 747 aircraft through, and its entrance is so large that clouds form inside the cave when atmospheric conditions are right. The cave systems of the Dinaric Alps stretching through Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia form one of the most extensive karst regions in the world, including Postojna Cave in Slovenia, which has been visited by over 38 million people since its discovery. Cave environments inside mountains have their own distinct biology, supporting species that have evolved in complete darkness over millions of years, and their own distinct geology, with formations like stalactites, stalagmites, helictites, and cave pearls that form by processes operating over immense timescales. The chemistry of these formations records past climate in the laid structure, and cores drilled from large stalagmites have been used to reconstruct rainfall and temperature history, going back hundreds of thousands of years. The mountain holds its climate archive not just in its glacier on the outside, but in its mineral formations on the inside. The world's highest mountain ranges are home to some of the most adapted and specialized wildlife on Earth, and the strategies these animals use to survive at altitude push physiology to its limits. The snow leopard, found across the mountain ranges of Central and South Asia, is among the most elusive large predators in the world. It is supremely adapted to life on steep, rocky terrain at altitude between 3,000 and 5,500 meters, with large paws that act as natural snowshoes, a long, heavily furred tail used to balance on rocky ledges and for wrapping around the body for warmth, and a deep chest cavity supporting enlarged lungs and heart for oxygen extraction at altitude. Snow leopards can leap up to 9 meters horizontally and jump to heights of 6 meters when hunting prey on steep terrain. Their pale, spotted coats provide camouflage against rock and snow so effective that researchers fitting them with tracking collars have sometimes lost sight of a leopard from less than 10 meters away. The bar-headed goose migrates over the Himalayas twice a year at altitudes that exceed 8,000 meters, the highest regular migration route of any bird, flying through air so thin that unacclimatized humans lose consciousness. The goose achieves this through a modified hemoglobin molecule that binds oxygen more tightly than that of other birds, and through a breathing pattern that maximizes oxygen extraction from each breath. The mountains select for extraordinary biology, and the animals that have passed their selection process are extraordinary in proportion to the demands that were placed on them. The Tibetan Plateau is the largest and highest plateau on Earth, and it functions as a heat engine that drives the Asian monsoon and controls the climate of an entire hemisphere. The Tibetan Plateau covers approximately 2.5 million square kilometers at an average elevation of over 4,500 meters above sea level, earning it the name the roof of the world. In summer, the enormous surface area of the plateau is heated intensely by the sun at high altitude where the atmosphere is thin and the solar radiation is strong. This heating warms the air above the plateau, causing it to rise and creating a large low-pressure system over the plateau. The resulting pressure gradient draws in moist air from the Indian Ocean to the south, producing the South Asian monsoon, the seasonal rainfall pattern on which approximately 1.5 billion people depend for agriculture and water. Without the Tibetan Plateau acting as a thermal pump, the monsoon as it currently exists would not occur. The plateau also influences the position and behavior of the jet stream and affects climate patterns across the entire Eurasian continent and beyond. The uplift of the Tibetan Plateau as the Himalayas grew over the past 40 to 50 million years is thought by some researchers to have contributed to global cooling over that period, both by increasing the rate of rock weathering that removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and by changing the atmospheric circulation in ways that affected global heat distribution. A mountain range changed the climate of the world. The volcanoes of the Cascade Range in North America are among the most dangerous in the world, and the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980 remains one of the most studied volcanic events in history. The Cascade Range extends from Northern California through Oregon and Washington to southern British Columbia and includes stratovolcanoes built by the subduction of the Juan de Fuca Plate beneath the North American Plate. These volcanoes, including Mount Rainier, Mount Hood, Mount Shasta, and Mount St. Helens, are capable of producing explosive eruptions, pyroclastic flows, and volcanic mud flows called lahars that can travel for tens of kilometers at high speed. On the morning of May the 18th, 1980, Mount St. Helens experienced the largest volcanic eruption in the recorded history of the contiguous United States. The eruption began with an earthquake that triggered the largest landslide in recorded history, removing the entire north face of the mountain and releasing the pressurized magma in a lateral blast that devastated an area of about 600 square kilometers, flattening forests and covering the landscape in ash. The eruption reduced the height of the mountain by about 400 meters. The recovery of the ecosystem around Mount St. Helens over the following decades has been one of the most intensively studied cases of ecological succession in the world, demonstrating how life recolonizes a devastated landscape and revealing unexpected patterns in which species arrive first, which survive, and how quickly complexity reassembles from apparent ruin. Mountains harbor the oldest exposed rocks on Earth, and reading those rocks requires skills and tools that were not available until the 20th century. The Canadian Shield, the ancient stable core of North America exposed across much of Ontario, Quebec, and the Northwest Territories, contains some of the oldest rocks on the surface of the Earth. The Akastic gneiss in the Northwest Territories of Canada has been dated to approximately 4.02 billion years, making it the oldest known intact crustal rock. The rocks of the Jack Hills in Western Australia contain zircon crystals dated to 4.4 billion years, approaching the age of the Earth itself. These ancient rocks record conditions on the early Earth in their chemistry, their mineral composition, and the ratios of isotopes they contain. They preserve evidence of early oceans, early atmosphere, and possibly early life in the form of chemical signatures left by biological processes that have no known inorganic equivalent. Reading these rocks requires isotopic analysis techniques of extraordinary precision, since the features that carry information are often chemical rather than visual and require mass spectrometry and other laboratory tools to detect. The mountains and shields that expose these ancient rocks are windows into the first billion years of Earth's history, a period from which almost nothing else survives. Every ancient outcrop is a rare and irreplaceable document from a time when the planet was unrecognizable from what it is today. Mountain passes have determined the course of human history more than almost any other geographical feature, and the civilizations that controlled them controlled the flow of goods, armies, and ideas. A mountain pass is a low point in a mountain ridge that allows passage through terrain that would otherwise be impassable, and throughout human history, control of passes has been a central strategic objective. The Khyber Pass connecting modern Pakistan and Afghanistan has been used by armies and traders for at least 3,000 years, serving as a primary route between the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia. Alexander the Great passed through it. Darius of Persia passed through it. Genghis Khan passed through it. The Silk Road used mountain passes through the Pamo and Tian Shan ranges to connect China with Central Asia and the Mediterranean world, and the towns that grew up around these passes became wealthy and culturally vibrant centers of trade and exchange. The Street Bernard Pass in the Swiss Alps provided one of the most important trade and military routes across the Alps and was used by Hannibal, Napoleon, and countless medieval traders and pilgrims. Before roads and tunnels made mountain crossings routine, passes were the hinges on which the doors of history turned, and the communities that sat at their entrances controlled the flow of everything that moved through them. The geography of mountains did not merely influence history. In many critical moments, it determined it. The plant communities of high mountain environments have evolved strategies for surviving cold, wind, and low oxygen that make them among the most resilient organisms in any terrestrial ecosystem. Alpine plants, those growing above the tree line where conditions are too harsh for trees to establish, face a combination of challenges that include short growing seasons, intense ultraviolet radiation, frost at any time of year, thin soils, and extreme wind that can desiccate leaves faster than water can be replaced. Their responses to these challenges are visible in their growth forms. Cushion plants grow as tight, dome-shaped mounds that trap warm air near the soil surface, with temperatures inside the cushion sometimes 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding air, effectively creating their own microclimate. Some alpine plants have leaves covered in dense hairs that trap air as insulation, reflect excess ultraviolet light, and reduce wind speed across the leaf surface. Flowers of alpine plants often track the sun, rotating through the day to focus solar energy on their reproductive structures and speed up development in the brief season available to them. Edelweiss, the iconic alpine flower, produces dense, felt-like coverings of star-shaped woolly leaves that provide protection from ultraviolet radiation and cold. Some alpine plants flower within days of the snow melting, using stored energy to produce flowers before the growing season has properly begun. The alpine environment is a stress test applied to every living thing within it, and the plant that pass that test do so through an ingenuity of adaptation that reflects millions of years of selection pressure applied by cold, wind, and a sun that gives light but barely gives warmth. Mountain ecosystems are disproportionately important for global water supply, and the changes happening to them now will affect billions of people within decades. The concept of a mountain as a water tower is not metaphorical. Mountain ranges intercept far more precipitation than the surrounding lowlands, store it as snow and ice, and release it through rivers during the dry seasons when lowland rainfall is insufficient. In many mountain regions, the seasonal timing of this release is precisely what makes irrigated agriculture in the lowlands possible. The rivers fed by Himalayan glacier and snowpack reach their highest flow in the dry pre-monsoon season when demand for irrigation water is greatest, and the synchrony between peak river flow and peak agricultural demand is a product of the mountain hydrology that has allowed densely populated agricultural civilizations to develop in the river basins below. As glacier retreat and the seasonal snowpack becomes less reliable, this synchrony breaks down. Early snowmelt brings peak river flow before the crops need it, and the rivers run lower later in the season when irrigation demand peaks. This is not a future problem. It is a present one in several mountain river basins, and the communities experiencing it are among the most food insecure in the world. The relationship between mountain ice and lowland food production is one of the most consequential in the Earth system, and it is changing rapidly enough that its effects will be felt across the lifetimes of people who are children today. The mountains of East Africa created the conditions that may have driven the evolution of our own species. The East African Rift System, a tectonic feature stretching from the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia southward through Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique, has been pulling the African continent apart for millions of years, creating a chain of rift valleys, lakes, and volcanic mountains running down the eastern side of the continent. The uplift of the East African mountains and the formation of the rift created a rain shadow that made eastern Africa progressively drier and more open over the past several million years, replacing forests with grassland and savanna. The great apes that had lived in the forest were forced to adapt to open environments, and it is in this context that the hominin lineage, the group that eventually led to modern humans, developed the bipedal locomotion, the dietary flexibility, and ultimately the enlarged brain that define our species. The mountains of Ethiopia, including the Ethiopian highlands, which are the most extensive high-altitude area in Africa, acted as a refuge during dry periods and a dispersal center during wet ones, and the fossils of early human ancestors are concentrated in the rift valleys of East Africa for this reason. Looking at the mountains of East Africa is looking at the landscape that shaped the evolutionary pressures that eventually produced human intelligence. The mountains did not just provide scenery for our evolution. They were one of its causes. The highest mountains create zones of permanent death for human physiology, and the physiological experience of climbing into the death zone is one of the most extreme things a human body can undergo voluntarily. Above approximately 8,000 meters, the atmospheric pressure is so low that the partial pressure of oxygen is insufficient to sustain normal human metabolism even with full acclimatization. This region, sometimes called the death zone, does not simply make climbing difficult. It actively dismantles human physiology over time. The brain, deprived of adequate oxygen, begins to make errors of judgment that the person experiencing them cannot recognize. Hallucinations occur. The perception of cold diminishes, producing the paradoxical undressing behavior seen in hypothermia victims who remove their clothing. Fluid accumulates in the brain and lungs, conditions called cerebral and pulmonary edema that can be fatal within hours if the climber does not descend. The only treatment for altitude illnesses in the death zone is descent, and even descent requires physical effort that the compromised body may not be capable of producing. Climbers in the death zone deteriorate measurably with every hour they remain there, losing cognitive function, muscle mass, and physiological reserve in a process that cannot be reversed by rest alone. That more than 6,000 people have stood on the summit of Everest is a testament to the extremes of preparation, technology, and determination that human beings are capable of. That the mountain remains capable of killing even the most experienced climbers without warning is a testament to the extremes of the environment they are entering. Mountains that have been worn to their roots over billions of years reveal the deep architecture of the crust and exposures that would be inaccessible any other way. When the upper portions of a mountain range are removed by erosion over hundreds of millions of years, the deeper rocks that were once far below the surface are gradually exposed. These deep rocks formed under pressures and temperatures very different from surface conditions, and their mineralogy and structure record the conditions that existed at depth. Eclogite, a rock that forms at pressures corresponding to depths of 50 to 100 kilometers below the surface, has been found exposed at the surface in Norway, brought up by the same tectonic forces that built the ancient Caledonian Mountains and then exposed by 300 million years of erosion. Diamond, which forms at depths of 150 kilometers or more under enormous pressure, is brought to the surface in volcanic pipes called kimberlites, and the mountains of southern Africa that contain these pipes are the source of most of the world's gem diamonds. The exposure of deep crustal and mantle rocks to the surface by erosion and tectonic exhumation allows geologists to study directly the conditions that exist deep in the earth that no drill has ever reached. Every ancient mountain range is a cross-section through the Earth's crust, and reading the rocks exposed in its eroded cores is reading the interior of the planet from the outside. The sacred significance of mountains in human culture is universal, found in every tradition on every continent, and the reasons for it go deeper than mere impressiveness of scale. Mountains are sacred in Hindu, Buddhist, Shinto, Aboriginal Australian, Indigenous American, Ancient Greek, and many other traditions. Mount Kailash in Tibet, which has never been climbed out of religious respect, is considered sacred by Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and followers of the indigenous Bon religion, making it the most sacred mountain in the world by the breadth of the traditions that venerate it. Olympus was the home of the Greek gods. Sinai was where Moses received the law. Fuji is the sacred center of Japanese identity. Adam's Peak in Sri Lanka bears a depression said to be the footprint of the Buddha, of Adam, of Shiva, and of St. Thomas depending on the tradition. The convergence of sacred meaning on mountain peaks across cultures that had no contact with each other suggests something about the relationship between the human mind and the experience of great height. Mountains are the places where the earth and the sky most nearly meet. They are above the weather, above the noise, above the familiar landscape of daily life. They are cold and clean, and still in a way that nothing at lower elevations quite matches. Whatever the theological content of the traditions that have gathered around them, the experience of standing on high ground and looking outward has clearly touched something in human consciousness that expresses itself as reverence regardless of the language or the tradition in which it is expressed. Mountains are disappearing and appearing simultaneously across the earth right now, and both processes are accelerating. In the Himalayas and the Andes, ongoing tectonic activity means that mountains are being built faster than erosion can remove them, and both ranges continue to gain net elevation. But in many other locations, mountains are losing material faster than any process is replacing it. The combination of climate-driven glacier retreat, permafrost thaw, and increased frequency of extreme precipitation events is destabilizing mountain slopes that were previously held together by ice and frozen ground. Rock falls, landslides, and debris flows in mountain regions are increasing in frequency and magnitude as the permafrost that had cemented loose rock together for thousands of years melts. The Dolomites in northern Italy, the Alps, the Rockies, and the mountains of Central Asia are all experiencing increased rockfall activity that is altering their profiles. Entire mountain faces that have been stable throughout recorded history are collapsing. New peaks are being exposed as glacier reveal bedrock that was last uncovered during the last ice age. The mountains are not static backgrounds. They are responding to the warming of the planet in ways that are visible from satellites, measurable by instruments, and felt by communities in the valleys below, where the debris of changing mountains arrives as floods, landslides, and the slow disappearance of the seasonal snowpack that once delivered their water reliably and on time. And so we drift gently down from the peaks, carried back to the valleys by the same gravity that shapes everything in the mountain world, carrying with us the quiet wonder of everything we visited tonight. We climbed past the marine fossils near the summit of Everest and understood that the highest point on Earth was once the floor of a shallow sea. We descended into the mid-ocean ridges and found the longest mountain chain on the planet hidden completely beneath the water. We followed ancient rivers cutting their gorges 5,000 meters deep, and watched the material of mountains being carried grain by grain to build the deltas where billions of people now live. We found snow leopards invisible from 10 meters and geese crossing above 8,000 meters on wings shaped for an atmosphere that barely exists. We stood in passes where armies and traders and ideas have moved for 3,000 years and felt the weight of everything those passages have carried. We visited the mountains of East Africa and found a landscape that may have shaped the evolution of our own minds. We read ancient rocks brought up from 100 kilometers below the surface and found diamonds carried from the mantle in volcanic pipes. We listened to the mountains breathe in their glacier and exhale in their rivers and understood that the water in the cup beside you tonight may have spent 10,000 years inside a mountain before it arrived. The mountain does not ask for your attention. It simply stands and waits and offers everything to those who are willing to be still enough to receive it. If you enjoyed this sleepy journey, you can support the channel by liking, subscribing, or leaving a calm little comment before you rest. It helps more curious minds find their way here. And if you are still awake, there's another video waiting on your screen, ready to carry you onward into another corner of science. But for now, let the questions loosen their grip. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Allow your breathing to slow, steady, and deepen. Picture a mountain at night, enormous and still above the tree line. The air impossibly clear. The stars so bright and close they seem to rest on the peaks. Everything below you quiet. Everything above you open. The mountain has been here for millions of years and will be here for millions more, indifferent to the hour, unbothered by the dark, patient in a way that nothing else on earth quite manages. You do not need to climb anything tonight. You only need rest. Sleep well, and good night.